All right, thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Improvements in Protocols Publishing Workflow webinar. I'm Laney Titleman, one of the co-founders and CEO of Protocols.io. We also have Dr. Gabrielle Gaske, who is our head of outreach on the call, and Dr. Emma Ganley, who sort of oversaw over the past 6 months or however long it was, the changes that we rolled out to the publishing flow. She unfortunately cannot be here on this webinar, so Gabrielle and I will be leading this. I'll show the agenda in just a second, but in terms of housekeeping, we are recording it and we will be sending the video and the slides to everyone who registered, so you don't need to scribble down URLs and notes through this. There will be a Q&A section at the end, but as Gabrielle is on, as we go along, feel free to add your questions to the Q&A. Gabrielle might respond to some of them or we'll get to them at the end, but you don't have to wait till the very end. Also, in terms of asking questions at the end, it's livelier if you unmute yourself, but we need to allow that. It's a webinar setting that we're running, so just use the raise hand button and we'll unmute you, and then you can speak, or you should feel free to enter questions into the Q&A part. The other thing is this webinar is not an introduction to Protocols.io. So if you're new, check out the link to either our previously recorded intro webinars if you're looking for one of those, or take a look at the webinars, regularly scheduled webinars that we have coming up in October. If you have specific questions about the editor, setting up your workspace, any other things not related to publishing, email us at info@protocols or click the link that's here, help/demo, and you can pick a time during the week that works for you to connect for a 30-minute call where on Zoom where you can share your screen. We can share a screen, answer any specific questions, or give you a general introduction on any part of Protocols.io. So with that out of the way, as a reminder, our mission is to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. And as I said, on this webinar, we'll be focusing on the publishing. So not before and not after, not keeping them up to date on versioning details or internal teamwork. We'll really be focused on public sharing and the recent changes that we've introduced to that flow. All right. Before we dive into the changes themselves, we'll do a quick review of what it used to be, what it is now, and then go through the actual publishing flow, highlighting the details that you need if you are publishing as part of a research paper or a method, peer-reviewed method paper specifically. We'll talk about the best practices for how to include links to the Protocols.io protocols in your papers, how to cite them, and we'll talk a little bit about the changes to our screening process, and then go into the Q&A. Before we start all of that, if you haven't shared on Protocols.io yet, I want to very quickly go through some of the reasons why people share public methods. So at a glance, there are two sides to Protocols.io. There is the public access, open access repository, and that's free to read and free to publish. You can publish as many protocols as you need. There are no limits and no charge. And there are almost 50,000 private protocols, but you'll see that there's also more than 13,000 public protocols. And lower down in the statistics, in terms of reasons to share your protocols publicly, these 13,000 public protocols have about just over 200,000 scientists, researchers looking at them every month. In 2021, there were more than 1 million people that came to read the public protocols in that year. And so when you share publicly, obviously, there's greater discoverability. It's better than sending PDFs. And there will be recognition and credit for your method development as people come from Google, from papers, and take a look at your detailed protocols. The other reason is that there are more and more journals, I think it's over 600 now actually, that explicitly recommend sharing on protocols.io when you submit a paper. So it's good for your manuscript submissions. It makes your papers more reproducible, and publishers in the author guidelines at submission, many of the publishers explicitly recommend putting a detailed link on protocols.io. And there's a growing number of funders that recommend or even require sharing protocols and recommend protocols.io specifically, or even pay for their grantees to have premium protocols.io for private use. And one of my favorite recent quotes is from Professor Martellotto, who said, 80% of my recent collaborations have been a direct result of sharing our protocols publicly on protocols.io. So not only are you getting credit, but you extend your networks, you can have more collaborators. It's a good thing to share protocols. And on a very sort of selfish reason to share protocols, one of the things we see from groups that are developing really new methods that people are adopting and there's a lot of attention to, when you share on protocols.io, for those of you who are familiar with the platform, you'll know that on every step of a protocol, you can ask a question. And so answering questions on your protocols that you've shared publicly, if these are public discussions that are happening, instead of answering the same question 50 times in a month by email to different people, you can point people to the specific step with the answer to the question. And ideally, over time, as people see your protocol on protocols.io and see that discussion on the side of that step, they're not going to be emailing you with the question altogether. And it also will show a few examples later on in the webinar. But if you have your protocols in protocols.io, the getting DOI, citing them, the parts we'll be talking about on this webinar, actually makes it easier to write your method sections instead of trying to cram in all of the details and change your good protocols into past tense and put in just a single paragraph with tight space. You can add the link to protocols.io and tell people where to find the full details and just briefly describe how you perform the experiments in the method section. And finally, if you share a PDF as supplementary material, if that's what you're sending around, when you make any improvements or changes or clarify things as people ask you questions and improve your protocol on protocols.io, it's very easy to click create new version. The previous version is in place, the new version is available, and everyone is automatically guided to it. But it's very hard to do with a PDF. So with that background, let's take a quick look at what the changes are to the publishing process. So before you publish, you have a share button on every protocol where, kind of like sharing Google Docs, you decide who to share with, what permissions to give them. That's this share button right here. There are no changes to that. You will also see, so on the right-hand side, there are screenshots from the protocols.io interface. When you're in the editor, in the editing mode, the publishing options are on the right-hand side at the top under the More button. When you're viewing, if you click View and exit out of the editor, when you're viewing the protocol, the Publish, Reserve DOI, Post, and Share options are at the top. Posting a draft, we're not going to talk too much about it, but this is for preliminary sharing. This is not what you're supposed to do if you want full credit, permanence, and to include your protocol in publications. Posting a draft is very preliminary. I'm doing open science. I want to share. I'm not 100% maybe even sure if the protocol works. You click on it. It remains editable. You can delete it later. There is no DOI. It doesn't go to all the other services that are doing mirroring and archiving. So draft is for preliminary. If you're really fully sharing, you should be using publish or reserve DOI, and we'll talk about that. The publish flow has not really changed on protocols.io. What has changed is the semi-private sharing. If you are uncomfortable making your protocol fully public and visible in Google and in protocols.io search results, you're just submitting a paper. We used to have a get DOI button that sort of had your protocol enlisted. That is now reserved DOI. So we'll talk about that in detail, why the change and what the change is. And also, if you're submitting to one of the minority of journals that require double blind, under the share button, that hasn't changed. Under the share button at the top is a private link button. You can get a regular private link or an anonymized private link for submitting to journals that have double blind peer review. And finally, the last thing, we used to screen after publication. We're doing screening of protocols before, and I will also talk about that briefly. Again, reminder for those who are joining us a little bit late, we're recording this. We'll send all of this around, including the slides. And as we go along, because our head of outreach, Gabrielle, is here, feel free to ask any questions that might pop up before we get to the Q&A section. Okay. So in terms of how to publish your protocols when they are accompanying manuscripts that you're submitting, let's go into that. So there is a detailed help page on how to include protocols when you're publishing manuscripts. And our recommendation, strong recommendation, is that the easiest way to do it is to just click publish and make your protocol fully public. Once you do that, it automatically gets a DOI. We'll show you in a second. I'll show you where to grab the citation. It's very easy to include it in your manuscript. And when your paper is published, there's already a link. You don't need to worry about it, think about it. And you get earlier credit for your protocol. It becomes discoverable earlier. Possibly, if it takes a year for your paper to come out, your protocol is live and getting eyeballs and being used for a year before the paper sees the light of day. So many people do exactly that. They just click publish. We have some folks are concerned, will it be a problem if I'm submitting my paper? Do I need to keep my protocols private? And the answer is, this is kind of like sharing a preprint. The vast majority of journals and publishers welcome preprints nowadays, not just in physics, but in biomedical publishing as well. And as long as your preprint is not peer-reviewed, it's not considered a formal journal article publication that would be prior disclosure according to publishers. So preprints are okay. Protocols are just a preprint of the methods section. So since we've gone live in 2014, we've never seen an instance of a single instance of a journal complaining to an author that the protocol that accompanies the research paper has been shared previously. So we've never had an instance of that being a problem. So our recommendation, the simplest thing to do is when you're ready to share your protocol publicly, that you do that, and then you'll have the DOI and include that in the method section, as we'll show in a moment. However, you're usually not the only person on a paper or a protocol. You have a PI, you have collaborators, you have co-authors, and not everyone is comfortable with sharing the protocol publicly. So for that reason, we have the reserve DOI button that we will be looking at now. So the reserved DOI flow, we're going to exit out of the slides and go into a test protocol. So this is my demo workspace. I'm going to take a look at a dummy protocol. I'm not really publishing it. I'm just going to be reserving a DOI for it so that I can include it in a manuscript that I'm submitting, but it's not fully public yet. And before we go through that flow, just as a comment, for those that have published previously, if you're wondering why did we move to a slightly more complicated system with the reserve DOI button instead of what we used to have before, which was get DOI. For the first 5 or so years after we went live, get DOI worked very well. You clicked it, we sent the metadata, the abstract title, author information of your protocol to Crossref together with the URL link. We got a DOI, but we didn't make it fully public on protocols.io. It didn't show up on your profile. It didn't come up in search results if you were searching protocols.io. So it stayed sort of unlisted, like a video on YouTube if you click unlisted. That worked really well until different platforms started connecting to Crossref, finding the new protocols.io records, and then following the links, grabbing the PDF from protocols.io and showing it on other websites. So Google wasn't indexing it. We had no indexing for these unlisted links, but we started seeing more and more instances where we are not showing it in our search results. It's not on Google, but other platforms like ResearchGate suddenly have your PDF. You thought it's completely private. You're upset. That was becoming more and more of an issue. And so what happens now is instead of the get DOI button, there is reserve DOI. And I'll click on it now. We'll go through the flow, but essentially you'll get a DOI, but we don't send it to Crossref, which is the organization minting DOIs for research articles and different outputs like protocols. We don't send it to them. This is a DOI you'll have when you're ready to fully make the protocol public, but it doesn't go anywhere. No one, anyone who has that DOI and clicks on it will not get to a live page. And so we'll show you how exactly then do you include it in your paper so that an editor or reviewer can access it. So let's go through. I'm clicking reserve DOI. This is almost identical to the full publishing workflow. So the steps that we're going to go through very quickly are the same. We require a title and abstract. You can add a disclaimer if there's any health concerns or any risk in sharing your protocols. We have a standard disclaimer. You can add that. Your funder information, grant ID doesn't apply. Add the authors and affiliations. You can see it's a lot easier than publishing a full paper. So it's going to take me 3 minutes to go through this. We ask you to identify, label your protocol so that this will show up publicly on whether it's robust and working, in development, or something else. And this is the message that will show up on your protocol. Is it research or non-research? If you're sharing a cooking recipe, please select non-research. Any workspaces that you're affiliated with. Then we ask you to preview, make sure it looks good. And the final step is to confirm that your colleagues are okay with you sharing it and that you understand that the second you click this, this version becomes fixed. And the reason for it is if you're submitting this as part of manuscript submission and reviewers are taking a look at it, it needs to be stable. So when you get feedback on the protocol or on the paper, if you need to change anything, you'll need to click create new version and then update what's in your manuscript if you like. Or you can leave the original version and will guide people automatically to the newer version. But the point is, when you say get DOI, this version of the protocol is going to be fixed because editors and reviewers might be looking at it. So I'm going to click Reserve DOI. And I'm done. Again, this did not go to Crossref. And so you have the DOI to include in your manuscript. You can see here's the message about the success. However, we're also giving you what you'd find in the share button under the private link. It's not the anonymized private link for double-blind peer review. If you're submitting as part of double-blind, then go into the share button and grab that link instead. But this is what you will want to put in to your paper. You can click copy on the right-hand side, or if you're not working with the manuscript at that moment, you click done. Under the title, you'll always find here is your reserved DOI. And if you click the little I information icon, you get back to that message. So this is what you'll be including in your publication. It's the DOI and a private link. And you'll see a little note that says, when your paper is actually about to come out, please don't forget to make your protocol public and remove the private link because you want people actually using the DOI, citing properly, as we'll talk about in a second, not via this private link. It's not a tragedy if you forget to do that. Both the DOI and the private link will work, but your paper is neater if you remove this. So this is the reviewer link. Your editor will see it, reviewers will see it, and it's meant to be removed when you're actually publishing. Let's go back here. And in terms of including the protocols, so we just went over what the reserved DOI link and private link look like. But if you've clicked publish, or if you've clicked reserved DOI, we've gone over this. The next question is, how do you actually put it into your method section? This is a review of what I just showed live, the steps you need to take to actually remove the private link once accepted. And sorry, before we talk about where to include in the method section, as a reminder, if your paper is published and you forgot to click publish on the actual protocol and change from reserved DOI to fully registered DOI that has gone to Crossref, if you forget to do that, if we find your paper in PubMed Central and we find the DOI link, we will automatically push it live because you've already gone through the publishing flow. You've agreed to making it eventually available. You've confirmed that your co-authors are okay with it. So if we detect a private unregistered DOI in a method that section or anywhere in a paper that has been published, if it's an open access paper, we can do that and we'll flip it to full registered DOI, and that works. But if it's a subscription paper in Cell Press, Nature, or any other subscription journals, we might not notice it. We might not know about it. So at any point, if you come back to your protocol, the publish button is still there. So if you click reserve DOI, it's not fully published. And if it hasn't happened automatically, before your paper comes out or right when it came out, come back, kind of like making your data set in a repository available. If it was under embargo, you want to flip it to being fully available and resolving. And in terms of including in your paper, in terms of including the link in your paper, if you look at any protocol, there is a metadata tab. There's a metadata tab, and there will be a citation link. Let's actually take a look. So here's something that I have made public previously. It's the mission, vision, and principles of Protocols.io as a company. And if you look at metadata, there's the protocol citation. And you should obviously take a look at the guidelines of the journal that you're submitting to, but you can always grab this, copy it, and put it into your paper. And in terms of including the link, in the method section, people will sometimes aggregate all of their 10 protocols that accompany a paper. I'll show it in the next slide, and make a collection, get a DOI for the collection, include the link in the method section of the paper. Sometimes you'll have 3 protocols and you just put in the specific protocols into the relevant parts of the method section as 3 different DOIs. All of that is fine. However, we also recommend strongly that you grab the citation from the metadata tab, format according to the journal, and include it in the references as a full citation. And the reason to do it is because it makes your protocol more discoverable. It's a good example. It teaches people that method development deserves credit, its work, and it is a research output. It teaches other people that are looking at the paper to cite you properly, not just grab a link URL to your protocol and share that, but to cite it as a research output. So it leads to people getting more credit for their work. And on a very pragmatic technical level, because even subscription journals make the reference sections now available, by including a full citation, even if your manuscript is published in a subscription journal, we can find that your DOI should go live. It's easier to track. And as your protocol is reused in other papers, we keep track of what are all the different published papers that cite your protocol. So the more you follow this style and put in the protocol as a full citation, the more likely we are to discover it, the more credit you'll get, the easier it is for us to see when your protocol has been published and when it has been cited. So strongly recommend that. And an example from a PLOS biology paper of what I mentioned are collections. And when you click create new in protocols.io, you have the option of either creating a new protocol or creating a new collection, which is like a container for 10 or however many protocols are accompanying your paper. And here's an example in the PLOS biology paper. In the PLOS biology paper, the authors wrote methods and protocols for Drosophila rearing, media preparations, and microbial manipulations are available as a collection in protocols.io. Here's the link to the collection. And you still have the method section. You still briefly need to describe to everyone reading the paper what methods you used. Are they appropriate for the conclusions, for the data that you're gathering and analyzing? So you still have a method section, but essentially those are abstracts describing roughly what you've done. The details can be on protocols.io. You don't have to worry about the size of the paper for older journals, any possible page limits, and you can provide the full details, make your paper more reproducible, get more credits, all of the benefits of that public sharing. It is an essential repository, and you can have a shorter method section and guide people to the details. On protocols.io, as we said, we call it dynamic permanence. You can then, long after the paper was published, unlike a PDF, you can come in at any point, make a new version, share any improvements, corrections, optimizations, and anyone who comes in from the original DOI will get a pop-up, as you see here, saying there is a newer version available. And on protocols.io, not only does the paper point to protocols.io, but under the title, you have the link to the journal, to the paper itself. I'll show that in just a moment. And when you have published a protocol and a corresponding paper, they link to each other. On the metadata tab of protocols.io, I can show this live. On the metadata tab, you'll have the link both to the protocol, the citation for the protocol, and to the published paper. So here under the title, if you mouse over Nature Communications, if you go to metadata on this protocol, you'll see there's a protocol citation. And we say, because this protocol is part of the published paper, please don't forget to cite the following publication. So you have the protocol citation and the paper citation as well. And after your paper is published, if you want to add the citation and link back to the paper, so this protocol is just independent. This is a document that we've shared. It doesn't relate to any paper. However, you can always come in and at the drop down next to the title, there is the manuscript citation. And this is the part where you can add the link to your paper. And that creates that bidirectional relationship. The paper points to protocols.io and protocols.io, your protocol points back to the paper. So you'll have both citations of the protocol and the published paper. And I'm almost done. This is supposed to be 45 minutes, so we are getting close to the Q&A. Just a few more quick items that I wanted to share. We do archive and mirror all of the public protocols in multiple places. There's long-term preservation through clocks. And one of examples that I absolutely love, when you're not sharing your protocols as supplementary information, when you put them into a central repository, there are benefits not all that different from the benefits of using repositories for data like your protein structures and PDB or sequences and CBI. The reason to use repositories is really nicely demonstrated by this exchange where a researcher from Chile was asking, does anybody have an example of how to do RNA extraction from primary cortical neuron cultures? Postdoc from UCSF said there are a few good examples on protocols.io, but here's one that should work for you. And this is such a wonderful example because the actual protocol that she was referring to, if you take a look where it's coming from, it's part of a GigaScience paper on parasites of stickleback, three-spined stickleback fish. So when the authors included this protocol in the paper, not only did they make their paper more reproducible and all the benefits that we've talked about on this webinar of making your protocol public, but on top of it, because they put it in protocols.io, it becomes discoverable in a repository and can lead to reuse and extension in other fields. I guarantee you that a person looking for, almost can guarantee you that a person looking for RNA extraction protocol in primary cortical neuron cultures is unlikely to also be familiar with this paper. So if the protocol was a PDF only sitting on this paper, highly unlikely that anyone from a different field would come across it. When you put it in a central repository, people can reuse, build, and give you credit for your work in really wonderful and surprising ways. And the very last thing that should take me just a minute is a note on the change in the screening at protocols.io. So any protocol that goes public on protocols.io, we've always screened to make sure that spam and pseudoscience do not pollute the repository. So one of us, we alternate between all of the folks at protocols.io with the screening, and I can actually show you what that interface looks like. So we have in our console on protocols.io, we have whole interface built for reviewing every single publish request from today. Even though it's morning in California, you can see that there are 2 real published protocols today so far, and several spam ones for CBD gummies or diet pills. You name it, we've seen it. Amazonian sunrise drops. So folks come in and try to put random crap. We've always been screening, but about a year ago, it got so bad that we would get 100 or more spam protocols in a single day, and 10, 15 real ones. So we had to constantly retract. These protocols ended up, these fake protocols ended up going to the long-term preservation as PDF, spreading to our partners in mirroring. And so what we've done is we've switched to first we screen, just like bioRxiv, medRxiv do, and arXiv itself, standard preprinting servers. We've switched to screening first. So when you click publish, it will go into our system. We'll take a look, and we need to click approve or decline and suspend. So there will be, as of a couple of months ago, when we switched to this new flow, there will be a slight delay before your protocol goes live. It's usually at most a day if it's on the weekend. During the weekdays, it might be a delay of a couple of hours, but we routinely a couple of times throughout the day take a look and approve protocols, so it shouldn't be a huge delay. And if you are in one of the universities that has a site license for protocols.io, like any of the University of California campuses, as long as you've verified your academic account, we know that you're probably not submitting CBD gummies to protocols.io. So when you click publish, we'll still review it, we'll take a look, but it goes live right away. And if something is wrong and slips through, then we might take it down, but I don't think we've had to do that in the last couple of months. So if you are in a university with a site license, there will be no delay. We'll still screen it, but there should be no delay. For everyone else, on a typical day, there might be a couple of hour hold up or up to a day before your protocol actually goes live. And sorry that spammers ruin everything for everyone, but c'est la vie. All right, and with that, I will stop and we can answer any questions. And again, as a reminder, feel free to use the raise hand option, and we'll unmute you and you can ask a question, or just type it into the Q&A.
There is a question, Lenny, asking that if somebody reserves a DOI, will others who view my protocol not be able to properly cite the protocol? Do I have to publish to be correctly cited?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct, that you do have to publish for the full citation to be available on that metadata tab. If you just do reserve DOI, you know how to include it in the paper, but people are accessing it through a private link. So the DOI would be available. You can share it with people and tell them how to cite it, but that link won't work yet. You do need to share the private link, and you'll have the message on your protocol, like I showed. That should.
But the DOI itself doesn't change.
The DOI itself will not change when you click publish. That is, thank you, Gabrielle, for clarifying it. When you click publish, the reserved DOI is the DOI for that protocol. Doesn't matter when you fully publish it, that's the DOI that will work once you hit publish. Any other questions? We still have a couple of minutes. And again, we'll share the slides, we'll share the video, and of course, If you do have any questions, input protocols.io. Was a reminder, reserve a one-on-one demo as needed, and we're always happy to answer questions. And then there's a question, can we link a protocol without having published an article? Do you mean, Asma, do you mean, can you make a protocol public without without publishing an article? So maybe you can clarify the question, but in the meantime, if you're asking, do I have to, oh, I'm not sharing the screen. If you're asking, do you have to make a protocol public only when you're publishing an article? The answer is absolutely not. So from the statistics that I showed, we go back here. From the public protocols that we have, those 13,000, I think it's somewhere around 20 to 30%, so 2,000 to 3,000 that are parts that accompany a published paper. The vast majority, 9,000 or 10,000 of these, are just people sharing the protocols because they've spent the last 6 months taking a protocol that was working in ladybugs and making sure that it also works for crickets, and you just want credit for that work. So it does not have to accompany a published paper. You are always very welcome to click publish and share the protocol on protocols.io for the benefit of the research community. It's your platform. The only review that we do, the only moderation is to weed out non-research spam. But it's your platform. You decide when to share, when it's the right time. Great question. All right, and I think it's not a very complicated change in our publishing flow. So we have the help pages. Hopefully this was fairly clear. And with that, we can stop recording. We'll hang around with Gabrielle for a couple more minutes, but thank you so much, everyone, for attending the webinar.